So I think we can begin in 1 minute. So it's really exciting, and to all the panelists, this is quite a momentous webinar because it's the first webinar under the Global Initiative to Support Parents. So you are all kicking off our public webinar series for the Global Initiative to Support Parents. So it's quite an exciting moment for all of us. So that's fantastic. Okay, we're right at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and Elizabeth, over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Shekufe. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Elizabeth Lule, and I am from Uganda, and happy to see fellow Ugandans who have joined, and for everybody from all corners of the world. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Childhood Development Action Network. We're a global platform that catalyzes collective action for greater impact in support of young children and their caregivers. I'm also delighted to introduce our co-host, Miguel Fernandes from Promundo in Brazil, who will moderate the webinar together with my colleague, Shekufe, and others. And then a very big welcome to our distinguished panelists and also the participants that have joined us. As Shekufe said, this webinar serves to introduce the Global Initiative to Support Parents Working Group on Fatherhood. And this is a very exciting moment for us. And I will talk about the Global Initiative to Support Parents and introduce it, and then obviously introduce also how this working group on fatherhood fits in. And then I'll hand over the meeting to Miguel. So let me share my screen.
And Elizabeth, as you're sharing your screen, just to tell participants, if you need interpretation, there's a little globe with an interpretation. We have interpretation in Spanish for those who are Spanish speakers. There will be some presenters who will speak in Spanish where you'll have to select English so you can hear the English translation. Okay, back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can put them in for any of us, you can put them in the Q&A. But I'm truly honored to speak on behalf of our partners, UNICEF, World Health Organization, Parenting for Lifelong Health, ECDAN, and another partnership on ending violence against children. So why did we need this global initiative to support parents? We have strong evidence for the effectiveness of parenting in programs in different settings. Over 100 randomized controlled trials have been conducted, but parenting support initiatives continue not to be a priority in many countries. There is not much investment, and oftentimes we have nice programs but are not brought to scale. And then came COVID-19, which actually exacerbated the challenges for parents, but also illustrated how little support was available to support parents who are stuck at home with children, with schools closed, with disrupted services. And also, I think, perhaps exacerbated the issues on gender inequality that continue to affect, how parents share their duties at home and the engagement of fathers to look after their children. And on our hands, we ended up with a global parenting crisis. So these partners came together that I've already mentioned to break down the silos and to work together to develop an initiative that would bring all the strengths of these organizations. UNICEF and Parenting for Lifelong Health obviously have amazing programs on the ground. UNICEF and WHO with the work that they do and the rigorous and robust research that they do. And then the two partnerships, global partnerships, are Ending Violence Against Children and ECDAN as well. And of course, as part of this, there are so many other networks that belong to these organizations. And this work builds on existing evidence-based models, the INSPIRE handbook, the Nurturing Care framework that we all know about, Care for Child Development, Reach Up, and so many others. And I do want to acknowledge the work that Plan International has done together with Promundo in developing a framework that presents the role and the importance and the interventions that can be rolled out to support fathers. So the global initiative to support parents has identified several principles to be evidence-based, but obviously to strive for impact and scale up, to be low cost and non-commercial, scalable and sustainable, and open source, which is adaptive, but also locally relevant, noting that fatherhood is very contextual and very cultural. And we have a collective action framework that focuses on innovations, business as usual, as we all know with COVID-19 isn't going to take us anywhere, to continue to generate evidence and also looking at the systems that are required to scale up programs, advocating, and as well as working to scale up these programs. So several exciting things in store for us. You should look out for regional parenting convenings. This work is supported by USAID that provided us with support through WHO to increase visibility of parenting support as a global public policy issue and make the evidence based on parent and caregiver support public. All these meetings will take place in all the regions of the world. And then please look out for a global parenting summit at the end of 2022 as well. And the other actions that are planned, we plan to have a GISP website and a knowledge portal where people can share their resources and their knowledge, their research. We'll also conduct regional mappings. We'll have a global compendium of case studies on fatherhood and programs that have succeeded, but also learning from failures. We have set up a donor advisory group, and we'll have a meeting coming up shortly. And then we have a call to action that many groups and partners have signed on to, thematic working groups, and obviously this webinar is very exciting. And then we plan to have guest newsletters that will keep everybody informed. So for this webinar, we're launching the Global Initiative to Support Parents Working Group on Fatherhood. The objectives are to elevate the work on fatherhood and male engagement in parenting, being developed by various partners in Africa and across the world, Europe and Latin America. And here a warm welcome to our sister regional networks, the Africa Early Childhood Network, the International Step by Step. A big welcome to you, Moses and Mihaela. And then we have MenCare and Promundo, the Lego Foundation supporting this, and of course the Aga Khan University that is with us this morning. We will create shared alignment of all invited partners to establish an international collaboration on the issue of male engagement and of course supporting fathers. We'll highlight advocacy work needed to encourage engaged caregiving by fathers, and we'll identify other partners to join the working group on fatherhood and for future events. And of course, Plan International is also very much welcome to join us as well. This is the webinar agenda. A warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Kyle Pruitt from Yale University. And then the other panelists, Dr. Richard Fletcher and Douglas Mendoza will participate as well. And then we will have short presentations from different partners engaged in this group. And then part 3 will be the call to action to all of us to continue this work and scale it up in support of fathers. And of course, look out for further information on the working group on fatherhood as we go forward. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over the moderation of the webinar to my friend Miguel Fernandes. Over to you for part 2 of this webinar.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It's really an honor to be part of the global initiative to support parents working group on fatherhoods. My name is Miguel Fernandes. I'll be moderating this first part of the seminar. I'm the founder of Promundo. I founded Promundo back in 1997 with two other co-founders, Dr. Meredith Nations and Mr. Marcio Schiavo. And as we celebrate our 25th anniversary next month, we'll be in June, on June 13th, we'll complete 25 years. I'm very and really touched by the opportunity to have Promundo be one of the leaders on this great initiative that we'll be launching today of the working group. This is very touching and very emotional moment, I think, for all of us. And I think we'll be able to discuss it further at the end of this great webinar. And just before I go on to moderate the first part of the seminar, I just want to give some very quick background on Promundo. As you may already know, Promundo is a Brazilian-based organization working domestically and globally with the support of many partners around the world on promoting gender equality and building a world free of violence by engaging men and boys in partnership with women and girls. As a matter of fact, this is our mission. And we found out in these 25 years of work that a key strategy for that, and I also include that as a personal experience that I had when I was a father, a newly father in 1998, to engage men in caregiving and fatherhood during early childhood development. In 2011, together with other institutional partners, we developed a methodology known as Program P. P as for pai in Portuguese or padre in Spanish. That means fathers in English. And since then, we have been able to engage thousands of men in fatherhood and caregiving during early childhood development in Brazil and elsewhere. That includes engaging men doing prenatal care, the support during delivery and during the first years of life. And Program P has received many awards and also was recognized by the Brazilian National Pact on Early Childhood Development in 2019 as the best methodology on early childhood development from a civil society organization. We have been also working very closely to expand, to promote sustainability, to promote replicability of these strategies on advocacy, on programmatic interventions, evidence-based impact evaluation with the government sector and the private sector, because we believe that we don't want to just be a pilot project. We want to do exactly what we're doing today, to promote best practices, to promote and share experiences so we can all work together on this great mission. And just as an example of the government sector, we support evidence-based prenatal policies with the Brazilian Ministry of Health, showing the great benefits for policy on engaging men during early childhood development, include cost-benefit analysis. And based on this evidence, the MOH in Brazil have developed several strategies with Promundo to train thousands and thousands of healthcare workers and providers in the country. And I'm very proud also to be here with these great partners also, and here a special thanks for the African Childhood Network that we had a great experience last year of working together on a full training course for childcare professionals from different countries of Africa last year. So thank you so much, FSEN, for all your support. And we are working also with other partners in Latin American region and Africa. But as I know that we have a very tight schedule, without any further ado, and thanking ECDAN again for this great opportunity, for being such a leader on the childhood development agenda here in Brazil and worldwide. It's great to collaborate on this initiative. And but I think we're going to have a chance to talk more about the launching and the role of Pramundo in this working group. But as I'm responsible to moderate the second part of our webinar, I just want to remind everyone and the participants of the topic of today's webinar, which is challenges of participatory caregiving and universal support to fathers. And I have to say that we have just an incredible panel for the second, for this part of the webinar, in which we will discuss with academics and practitioners on fatherhoods and the impact on early childhood development. And we'll have three panelists, as Elizabeth mentioned. The first will be our keynote speaker, Dr. Caio Pruitt, and followed by Dr. Richard Fletcher and Mr. Douglas Urrutia. So I would like to go ahead and very happily introduce Dr. Caio Pruitt. Dr. Pruitt, thank you so much for being here. Excuse me? Oh, sorry. So thanks so much, Dr. Pruitt, to be here with us. And I heard that you had to make some last-minute arrangements on our agenda to accommodate our webinar. And I'm personally very thankful for that. And just to give very quickly a background on Dr. Caio Pruitt, before his presentation, he's a clinical professor of psychiatry at both the Child Study Center and the School of Nursing at the Yale School of Medicine. Dr. Pruitt conducted the USA's only long-term study of the impact of children in primary caregiving fathers. He has also been the private practice of child psychiatry for 4 decades. He's the author of several award-winning books. He also writes a blog for Psychology Today called Once Upon a Child. He hosted his own Lifetime television series, Your Child 6 to 12 with Dr. Caio Pruitt. He is past president of 0 to 3, the National Center for Infants, Toddlers, and Their Families, and a past member of the Sesame Workshop Board of Directors. And Dr. Pruitt is featured in the award-winning 0 to 3 podcast series, Little Kids Big Questions, the God of Schools Parenting 5 series, and the Johnson & Johnson video, Distinctly Dad, Rewards of a Father's Love. Thanks again, Dr. Pruitt. You have 20 minutes for a presentation, and I want to just mention to all participants, please go ahead and include your questions in the Q&A link that we have for the Zoom webinar today, and I will be following that and use some of your questions for the final part of the Q&A. We're going to have the presentations first, and then we're going to have a Q&A discussion. And we'll use this Q&A for the final part of this panel. So Dr. Pruitt, the floor is with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Elizabeth, for this wonderful invitation and opportunity to speak with so many like-minded souls across our somewhat troubled planet. I will tell you the conclusion of my thoughts right here at the beginning. That is that fathers, I believe, are the greatest untapped resource in the lives of their children. And our policies, our health policies, our politics, our educational policies do not reflect that currently. And our children at a global level are paying a price. I have entitled my comments this morning, Engaging Fathers in the Lives of Their Young Children, Why It's Worth the Trouble. Those of you who have been programming for children and families for many years know that it is often seen as an extra burden to include fathers in health initiative, educational initiatives. And I'm here to help us examine why that's the issue, what the cost has been to us. I will not be using PowerPoint. I have myself maxed out on PowerPoint during COVID, and I really am a great believer in dialogue and discussion. So I'm going to You'll just have to concentrate on what we're saying to each other. This is an emotionally powerful and personal topic of fathering. And I would ask you to picture your own father for a moment, the one you have, the one you wish for, the one you're trying to be, or in the case of so many women, the one you're trying to fix. Keep him close for the rest of the morning. He'll keep us from drifting too far into the intellectual, the academic, the political, and the woke. Miguel and I exchanged narratives of what happened as we were preparing for this conference to us as men that brought us to care so much about helping children benefit from nurturing fathers. And he asked me to share mine with you. And my story comes in three parts. My personal experience of becoming a father as a man. Then there's the clinical experience of making use of that information. And finally, an opportunity to be a contributor to the scientific knowledge base. When I was I had just finished my residency in psychiatry, but I had also been an intern in a general hospital outside of Massachusetts, outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And my first child came a little early, and I was very anxious to be present at the labor and delivery. My wife had an illness, and I knew the support would be very important to her, and I was immensely curious. I was told by the midwife that I would need a written permission from the head of obstetrics to be present. This was the very delivery room in which I personally had delivered 6 or 7 children about a year previously as an intern and house officer. I found that startling and a little demeaning, but it was extremely common in the 1960s and 70s when this was happening. That experience stuck with me because being present made things better, I think, for my wife. It made things better for me to fall in love instantly with my infant. And it made me feel like this should not be a privilege. This should be a right of early paternal experience, because I knew we were off on a much stronger relationship and a much better journey when we had begun together in that experience. My training in pediatrics and child psychiatry, my experience in my private practice and my time in many clinics gave me a chance to observe how young children were engaging and really interested in their dads, or the men in their families who were playing the role of the father. Sometimes it was the grandfather, sometimes it was an extended family member, but the people who were partners to the mother in helping them raise their children. Children were immensely curious about them, interacted very positively with them, engaged, and they were showing a lot more interest in their fathers than anyone on the clinic staff seemed to be. That led me to wonder, what was it? Because there were some epidemiologic changes at that time. Women were returning to work or going to work for the first time in the 1970s, early 1980s. What was it that was likely to occur when a baby was in the care of a father? Because all of our educational interventions had always been about strengthening mothering, and fathering was always an afterthought or someone who was supposed to support the mother. But I had noticed in my own personal life that my baby was really interested in me and wasn't always looking over their shoulder to play with the mother. This led me to put together a small pilot study in the 1980s about the developmental confidence of infants and toddlers when they were in the primary care of their fathers. And what I found was, well, the news was there wasn't much news. These children were competent, they were thriving. There was no reason to think that the fathers caring for their children put them at risk. But I did notice not only the babies were thriving, but fathers tended to go about the business of nurturing in a slightly different manner. They played more often as they were teaching their children. Playfulness was a very important part of fathering. Roughhousing, an important part of fathering. Doing surprising things. Taking their fussiness less personally. Those were importantly different contexts for children. And I thought when added together with competent mothering, probably set these children up for a better life and for more experience. This, I would say this weaponized me a little bit, and I began to talk in the media and publishing. I briefly was pulled into some fathers' rights organizations until I realized I didn't belong there, because I was mostly interested in the children's rights to their father, not necessarily the other way. I felt that fathers could advocate for themselves. And I was deeply conscious of the cost to communities, countries of absent and neglectful, abusive, and emotionally unengaged fathers, and how they got that way. Because most men don't start off that way. The very influential fragile family study of unmarried couples in fragile families in Middle America, thousands of families, showed us over and over again that even young teenage fathers are interested in being in their children's lives. They often don't have a clue about how to do it, but their hearts begin in the right place. And I believe it is our job to keep them there. An opportunity came along after I had been in the business for about 15 years. The Office of Child Abuse Prevention in the state of California asked me and several of my colleagues, including my wife, to put to the test some of my theories about that having a father engaged positively early in the life protected you against some of the things that were especially painful in life, and might even protect the fathers from winding up as neglectful or as abusive men themselves. Well, it was time to see if we could prove that. The Office of Child Abuse Prevention in California came and asked us if we would develop an intervention that would change the approach that caseworkers had toward families that were already in trouble. The director of the organization at that time said to me, "We have spent $35 million over 18 years in the state of California on better ways to prevent abuse and neglection. And that research has not changed the training of one caseworker. I am tired of doing that. I think some of your ideas might help us move the needle." Well, to jump to the bottom line, he was absolutely right. What would be the best way to engage men that would positively change the lives of their children and their well-being? Well, should you work with men alone? Should men work with men? What do you do about the mothers? How do you strengthen child outcomes, which to me has always been the bottom line. I'm happy that the father feels better and more in love with his children, but unless it changes his behavior toward his child, I don't consider that necessarily a positive intervention. So supporting father involvement was the name of the intervention. It has been evidence-based at the gold standard. There were controls, randomized assignment, there were 2,000 families all over the United States and Canada. And jump to the bottom line. The most effective, and by most effective, I mean positive outcomes 2 years out. We found that working with the mother and the father in groups was more effective than working with the father alone. Why groups? Groups have a way of reassuring us that we're not alone. They normalize our experience. They help us share with each other the lessons learned, both the successes and the failures. They put the group leader or the so-called knowledge disseminator in as a consultant, not as a teacher. as you all know, teaching has, learning here tells us that teaching only goes so far in behavior. We found that when couples work together on improving their relationship, on improving the way that they were disciplining their children, understanding more about the role of the father and that it was different, and that his roughhousing didn't necessarily put the children at risk, but in fact helped them strengthen their ideas and their confidence in their own body and their ability to be effective in the world. The fact that the father was not as in, would often frustrate the child in learning tasks didn't mean that he was dismissive of their self-regard. It meant that he was trying to prepare them for the world beyond the mother. Mothers were very happy to be learning that, and they began to feel there were ways in which they could be supportive of the father, because we know the most important door to the children's, to engaging fathers with children is the one with the mother's door, well, the mother's hand on the doorknob. In other words, if she does not want him involved, it will be extremely difficult for him to be. If she is supportive of his involvement, he will often be very appreciative and jump in with both feet to be helpful. He has things to learn because he hasn't babysat in his life and our culture hasn't supported. But on the other hand, he has been learned, he has been taught that there are things that he can contribute. And when he does, the child reinforces all of that wonderful interaction as positive. In the end, we found that we were able to reduce harsh discipline, parental depression, parental anxiety, and child outcomes actually were improved. These children behaved better by the time they got to school. We were focused mostly on 2-year-olds. By the time they got to school than the children in the control groups or the children in the father's only groups. So Black and brown families, indigenous peoples, the Middle East, Asian, at-risk families, middle-class families have all participated in the SFI program, and the evidence base has been held to be strong throughout. So I think we, and that has surprised us. We thought the intervention would be more culturally bound than it turned out to be, and it has not. And we have learned culture after culture. Anything that can help you love your children in a more satisfying way and feel that you are important to them and that can help you treasure them in the ways that matter to us so much as parents, that is an almost universal cultural belief. And if that's what you stress in your paternal engagement intervention or policies, you are going to have success. We have, so I went from personal engagement to clinical engagement to academic. I started off as trying to define what it was that was happening to fathers when they were becoming fathers. Was that a good thing? And now we know that it is. We are now many studies that have affirmed when fathers are engaged in the lives of their children, especially from early, they tend to follow a better path themselves. They tend to be less violent. They have less accidents. They live longer, and they change jobs less frequently. All of those things are good for men. When children are involved with their dads, there are many positive outcomes for them. Of course, we can't do the definitive study where you raise the same child with a mother that was raised with a father. But what we can learn from this research is that we should be moving ahead. The science has spoken very clearly. It is time to open the doors to paternal access to their children. We need to be supporting mothers in the doing of that, because many mothers have had negative experiences with men that make it very hard for them to believe that their fathers could be, the fathers of their children could maybe be more loving than their fathers were with them. Miguel also asked me to talk about what I'm doing now. We are working very hard on the dissemination of this particular intervention in at-risk families across the United States. We've partnered with the Brazelton Touchpoints Institute here to make it available all across the nation to at-risk families. We are involved in the UK, Malta, and the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, of which ECDAN and Yale and Sesame and ACHEV are all members. So we have a common interest and a very strong belief that we are really ready now to turn this into action. And there is no reason for us to say, you know, we don't really yet know how that works. We do, and it's time to take responsibility for action and change. Thank you, Miguel.
Thanks, Dr. Pruitt. Very interesting. As a matter of fact, we conduct an extensive bibliographical review also with the Ministry of Health to start doing the policy work and advocacy work to extend the paternal leave in Brazil and to engage partners during prenatal care. And it's amazing the amount of evidence that we have now regarding the benefits for early childhood development, not only in the first years of life, but during prenatal care and also during delivery itself. It's amazing. You know, it goes on from reducing the need for delivery, the time, instant breastfeeding, and so many other benefits. So thank you so much, Dr. Pruitt, for this fascinating presentation. And I think, you know, we'll have the chance to chat a little bit more on the Q&A. And I just want to reinforce to all participants, please feel free to have questions on the Q&A link so we can have a discussion at the end of this panel. And I also, because of the time constraints we have, I just want to move on to Dr. Richard Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, thanks for your participation here today with us. Just a little bit background on Dr. Fletcher. He's an associate professor in the Family Action Center, Faculty of Health and Medicine, the University of Newcastle. Richard's experience included design and conduct of research into fathers' role in families across diverse settings, such as separated parents, new fathers, antenatal support, rough and trouble play with children, Aboriginal fathers, and fathers using the Richard's book, The Dad Factor, How the Father-Baby Bond Helps a Child for Life, has been translated into 5 languages. He's also an editor of the Fatherhood Research Bulletin. Dr. Fletcher, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. Once again, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for that introduction, Miguel. And hello to everyone there in different places. I'm a bit nervous, to tell you the truth, speaking to so many people with such depth of experience. My own work that I'm telling you a bit about tonight, like Kylie, comes from 30 years of trying to get fathers to be involved and to get health services to involve them. And many years spent trying to get dads to come to things, courses, programs, and so on. Led me to realise that, in fact, talking to them through their phones might be a way to reach them and save me a lot of effort trying to drag them along to meetings and clinics. So I'll just share this PowerPoint. And I'll start it from the beginning. I think it will let me. Yes. No, it won't let me. I'm talking about the SMS program, SMS for Dads program, that delivers messages to fathers' phones. I'll acknowledge first the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking from, the Awabakal and Worimi people, and pay my respects and acknowledgement to elders, past and present and emerging. The messages that we send to dads, there are 240 of them roughly. They arrive on their phones. So it's not an app that you download, it's a message that you deliver, that you get on your phone. They start at 12 weeks gestation, you could enroll there, and they continue until the baby's 48 weeks post-birth. The themes of the messages are father-infant attachment, father-mother team parenting, and father's self-care. which is mainly mental health. The messages are written particularly to support father-infant attachment as if they're from the baby. That is, they use the voice of the baby. For example, the attachment message might say, "Babies come with personality, Dad. Getting to know my personality can make being my dad much more rewarding for you." That's their message talking to the dad. The co-parenting or teamwork message suggests, "If you've been at work all day, you might be able to support mum by taking me out for a walk, Dad. This will give us more bonding time." And in self-care, for example, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to triple my weight in the first year. Don't let this happen to you too," because we know a lot of fathers in the Australian context stop exercising, playing sport once their baby's born, and weight is an issue. We also restrict the messages to being very brief. That's part of their attraction. They are about 160 characters on average. And so in order to give more information, we link about every third message to a parenting website or a mental health website, a non-profit website. That means that the dad, when he looks at a message, it'll have a URL, it'll say, "Click here for more info," and then he can click on that and go to a website. Every 3 weeks, we also include a mood checker, which is linked to the infant's development, because the dads, when they enroll, they add their expected date of delivery, or if they enroll after the birth, which they can, they enter their date of birth of their baby. That means we know roughly how that baby's developing, which means the messages can be synced to what's happening in that family. And dads forget they've told us that. And so we get a lot of feedback from fathers saying, "How did you know my baby was going to start rolling over? How did you know this was going to happen?" Forgetting that they've told us the date of delivery. And so we know when they're about to be born. There's a standard distress scale, the K6, the Kessler 6, which we use to detect dads who are in distress, and they complete that 3 or 4 times during the program. If they score high, they're escalated to a telephone help service that we have in Australia, which then calls them. So far, we've had 9,000 enrolments and about 80 to 90% of them complete, which for online free parenting programs, you would probably know is exceptional. The feedback we get every day from fathers sending us back messages is overwhelmingly positive. That program has been well developed in Australia, but we have also conducted in association with others programs in Nairobi and in Bogota in Colombia with Professor Amina Abubakar and Dr. Vivian, who you're going to hear from tonight. Well, it's nighttime here anyway. And as part of the CDMC study in the Nairobi context and in a pilot study in Colombia. I just want to give you some of the examples. Vivian's going to talk about the Nairobi project more, but I'll give you some examples of things that the Colombian fathers said. And this was after a 6-week pilot study, so not a very long intervention. The interviewers asking how they could give an example of the helpfulness of the message. And the father says, well, let's say they gave useful advice on things that you really don't know as a dad. And they focus on, for example, the different cries that the child makes, the attention that you have to give him. Sometimes I heard him cry. And sometimes your role as a parent, you say, it's better to leave him alone and detach a little bit. But then they said that they really need more attention. So the messages were really useful. And I know that a lot of the emphasis in Promundo, for example, is about the respectful interaction of fathers and mothers. This dad answering if they showed anyone, the father says, her, meaning the mother. And what did she tell you about the messages? the one about the baby doing what we call, in our context, tummy time on their face. She didn't know that, and she thought the baby had to wait till they were older. They were very helpful. We find that in the Australian context, more than 90% of the fathers show the mother the messages, and they start conversations between the father and the mother, because not that it's revolutionary information, it's often, as the examples I showed you, quite modest information, but it's enough for them to have a role saying, look at this, and show their partner and have a discussion. And on that line about the relationship effect of the messages, you can see from these examples, understanding the tiredness, the stress that the partner may be experiencing, supporting her in breastfeeding, which is often a big issue in the early months. And the third comment there about the messages reminding and affirming the father about the relationship and his role. We get this sort of comment frequently. It's not that the messages said something that they had never considered. It's more often that it nudges them, pushes them, supports them to be the best father that they can be. And so in that case, they manage to be supportive of their partner. That's all I'd like to tell you about the program. We're very pleased to see it piloted in different countries. And because the messages are cheap in a sense of each message is not very expensive, it's a model that we think has a lot of application for reaching fathers in any context almost. But of course, there's a language and cultural issue. Thank you.
Dr. Fletcher, thank you so much. Very interesting. We are introducing also in Brazil what we call Program P Online using WhatsApp, and very inspiring your discussion on new forms of connecting and communicating with fathers, mothers, and families. I definitely want to know much more about it later on, and as you do the call of action for this network to share this wonderful experience. So thank you so much. Dr. Pruitt, we have some questions for you in the Q&A box. We will address one of those questions at the end after Douglas' presentation, but if you want to start answering some of these questions, that would be great. And also already reinforcing the importance of the questions. If you have questions for Dr. Fletcher, please use the Q&A link for your questions now. And so let's move on because of the time constraints, even though a lot of ideas popping up, very interesting presentations. And now I want to introduce our colleague, great colleague from Douglas, Antonio Mendoza Fuchia from Maycare Latin America. Douglas has been one of the leaders on the fatherhood engagement agenda in the region. And thank you so much for your participation, Douglas. Just giving a quick background, Douglas Mendoza has 25 years of experience promoting new relationships between men and women, between adults, children, adolescents, young people, contributing to prevent violence in the family from a gender perspective, masculinities, children's rights, youth. He's the co-founder of the Men Engage Alliance. For almost 10 years, he was co-coordinator of Men Engage Network for Latin America. He has extensive experience in advising networks of masculinities, facilitating men's groups to transform masculinities, activists for social justice and equality movements in Nicaragua and the Latin American region in general, participating in advocacy initiatives aimed at ending violence against girls, boys, women. Douglas holds a master's degree in social management, social policies, and programs from UCA, Nicaragua. Thanks, Douglas. Again, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. A warm welcome for you to be here with us today.
Buenos días, un gusto estar por acá. Soy Douglas Mendoza de Nicaragua. Soy papá, soy coautor de 2 hijos, uno de 15 y uno de 7 años. Y esta experiencia de ser papá me ha transformado la vida para poder trabajar y creer que sí los hombres podemos involucrarnos y aprender mucho de la crianza con nuestros hijos e hijas. Men Care es una campaña global que busca promover la participación de los hombres, sus paternidades como cuidadores en equidad de género y sin violencia. Men Care América Latina somos parte de esta campaña global que coordina Promundo y Sonke, y en alianza con Men Gay Global y Men Gay América Latina. Y en el caso de la campaña en América Latina es coordinada por la Red de Masculinidad por Igualdad de Género, donde estoy yo, y Cultura y Salud de Chile en Nicaragua. Para nosotros trabajar la promoción de las paternidades comprometidas está centrada en poder transformar, involucrar a los hombres en las paternidades, en la crianza igualitaria. Por supuesto, para nosotros es muy importante, como ha dicho el doctor Kyle, el doctor Richard Fletcher, sobre generar evidencia que nos ayude a poder mostrar cuáles son todos los beneficios que tiene para los niños, para las niñas, para los papás, para las papás y para las familias, el que los hombres participemos en el desarrollo y la crianza de los niños y de las niñas. Para nosotros es muy importante que los hombres participen desde el inicio, desde el embarazo, con sus parejas, con su esposa, que es importante poder trabajar el trabajo de los cuidados de los niños, de las niñas, pero también el cuidado de la salud de los hombres, que es importante, hablemos de la paternidad como un deseo, que los hombres estamos orgullosos de ser papás, no solo para demostrar que somos hombres, sino desde el deseo, del involucramiento, que es importante estar vinculados en la salud de los hijos, de las hijas, que es importante jugar con los niños, es importante jugar con las niñas, establecer los vínculos afectivos a través del juego, cómo poder estar participando en la escuela, en el hogar, por supuesto, establecer vínculos afectivos en la crianza positiva, con amor, con ternura, crianza sin violencia. Importante también promover otros modelos de la igualdad en la casa, los hombres siendo modelos de la igualdad con las mujeres, con otros hombres, con los niños, con otros papás, y por supuesto es importante ser parte de la educación, la corresponsabilidad. Para nosotros, desde Men Care a nivel global, cada 2 años hacemos un informe sobre el estado de las paternidades a nivel mundial que nos permite recopilar todas las evidencias sobre la importancia de las paternidades, los cuidados con los niños, con las niñas, la salud de los hombres, pero también es importante generar evidencias sobre el sector salud, y estas evidencias nos ayudan a poder influir en las políticas públicas, globales, regionales, nacionales, y que nos permite crear estos mensajes positivos a través de la televisión, la radio, a través de afiches, a través de materiales educativos y, por supuesto, la propia historia de los papás sobre qué implica involucrarse en la crianza de los niños. Y desde ahí, como ya decía nuestro colega Miguel, hemos creado el programa P sobre paternidades en diversas partes del mundo. Estamos en más de 55 países, que nos ha permitido también poder evaluar el impacto de estos programas en estos países y que estas experiencias nos han ayudado a poder influenciar en algunos gobiernos la promoción de licencias de paternidades, parentalidades, en el trabajo con diversas organizaciones locales. Para nosotros es importante poder trabajar desde lo individual, en las relaciones con las parejas, con la comunidad, en el sector salud, en abogacía, en el trabajo con los papás, con las mamás, y por supuesto también poder trabajar con otras paternidades diversas en América Latina. En el caso de América Latina, hemos realizado lo que fue el Estado de la Paternidad de América Latina en el 2017 para poder conocer cuáles son los retos, cuáles son los desafíos que tenemos para poder promover licencias de paternidades, conocer cuáles son las barreras que tienen los hombres en la comunidad para participar en el parto del niño, de la niña, para poder tener los permisos de licencia de paternidades, pero también con estas evidencias nos ha ayudado también a influenciar que los gobiernos incluyan en la política pública y en la salud la licencia de paternidades. En América Latina oscilan entre 5 a 10 días de licencia de paternidades, pero también cómo poder trabajar con el sector privado para que generen estos recursos, para que los hombres puedan tener estos 5 días con goce de salario. Entonces es importante para nosotros generar todas estas evidencias para poder trabajar. En América Latina estamos en 11 países: Chile, Colombia, Uruguay, Brasil, Perú, Bolivia, México, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico. Y desde estos países hay diversas experiencias trabajando con padres en las clínicas, en hospitales, grupos de papás, hay campañas en la radio, en la televisión. También hay en Colombia, hemos trabajado con el tema de los cuidados, poder trabajar con los papás, con programas que trabajen con los niños, con las niñas, con las parejas, a través de los juegos, a través de la participación comunitaria, también desde Uruguay, diseñando líneas telefónicas para poder brindar información para que los papás quieran estar informados de cómo poder participar y cuidar a sus hijos y a sus hijas. También desde Brasil, cómo poder trabajar también las paternidades y también con padres que tienen discapacidades, poder trabajar con parejas de padres, de hombres, otras familias diversas para poder trabajar la paternidad y los cuidados, trabajar con hombres negros, padres afrodescendientes, padres indígenas, padres del ámbito rural, pero también poder trabajar el tema de la corresponsabilidad de las tareas de los cuidados, haciendo afiches, concursos nacionales de fotografía, promoviendo también la participación de los papás en las escuelas. Y luego también este programa de paternidades hemos trabajado en Bolivia con padres indígenas, donde lo hemos evaluado alrededor de otros programas vinculados con la generación de evidencia del impacto en la vida de los niños, de las niñas, el poder trabajar con la comunidad. Y también en el marco de esta pandemia COVID-19, desde México hemos generado padres en la contingencia, desarrollar otros procesos virtuales para poder trabajar en la prevención del COVID, en la integración de los papás en la comunidad, prevención de la violencia, poder trabajar con los servicios de salud, clínicas privadas, para poder acercar a los papás a las parejas en el nacimiento de los niños, de las niñas, poder trabajar también desde estos mensajes, desde los niños, vos sos mi papá cuando jugás conmigo, cuando tenés tiempo para trabajar, vos sos mi papá también cuando no ejercer violencia contra mi mamá, porque encontramos también que los hombres quieren ser buenos papás, involucrarse en la crianza positiva, en el cuidado, pero todavía tienen prácticas de violencia hacia sus parejas, hacia su esposa. Entonces, para nosotros es importante diseñar programas que nos ayuden a involucrar a los papás en los cuidados, pero también programas para la prevención de la violencia hacia las mujeres, hacia los niños, la importancia de los juegos, la importancia del contacto con la naturaleza, la importancia también de poder trabajar con los cuidados hacia los animales, hacia la naturaleza, los niños, las niñas. También hemos recopilado diversas experiencias de trabajo en América Latina como experiencias motivadoras, exitosas, para poder compartir con otros colegas a nivel de América Latina, a nivel global. Y también hemos trabajado en Centroamérica con el sector salud, conocer cuáles son las barreras que hay en el sector salud que impiden que los hombres lleguen a los controles prenatales, postnatales, en el parto humanizado, el nacimiento, en el control de las vacunas. Entonces, para nosotros es importante poder conocer cómo los estereotipos tradicionales de género y las condiciones de los hospitales, de las clínicas, son barreras que impiden que los hombres puedan asistir en los controles prenatales y en control de la salud de los niños y de las niñas. También es importante reconocer que en la medida que hemos trabajado la promoción de las paternidades con ternura activa, hay otras formas de los paternajes, paternaje entre parentalidades, hombres discapacidad, hombres homosexuales, gay, trans, queer. Entonces también es importante hablar de paternajes, de cuidados en América Latina, y luego también hemos desarrollado diversas jornadas en este periodo entre junio, julio y agosto, jornadas sobre el juego, sobre los cuidados, y tener diversas experiencias donde son los hombres que comparten su experiencia. Voy a cerrar con un video que hemos realizado como parte de la campaña en América Latina, que nos permite compartir las diversas maneras en que los hombres nos podemos involucrar. Y con eso termino mi presentación.
Al nacer, al dormir, al comer, en el hogar, al cuidar tu salud, al jugar, al aprender. Siempre estoy para ti. Soy tu papá.
Muchas gracias.
Douglas, thank you so much. My round of applause to all three of you. And Douglas, what the work that you are leading in Latin America, fascinating. We'll have 10 minutes now for question and answers. I will just do very quickly one question for each one of the presenters, selecting here from the Q&A link. But I just want to say how thrilled I was with all the presentations and with the participants. You are doing a wonderful work, and just seeing everyone here participating so much. Elizabeth, I think ECDAN is not creating just a working group. You are creating a community, a global community on this issue, and this will be very strong for the work that will be conducted later on. So I'm very touched by everything that is happening today here. Dr. Pruitt, I have selected one of the questions that I thought was important. I know that you already answered, but just to have it shared with everyone. The question came as working with both mothers and fathers. Is there any benefit to working with them separately first, men separately and then together? Dr. Pruitt, I think you have your microphone off.
Yes, my apologies. That's got to be the most common COVID conversation of all. We tried at the beginning when we were designing the SFI intervention and found that if we only met with the fathers first, the mothers were a little suspicious of what they were up to and what they were doing. When you met with the mothers first, what happened is that they became a very close group emotionally and were less likely to make room for the paternal engagement piece. So we designed the program to begin with the couple, but to have opportunities for men-only groups built into the curriculum every third or fourth week, and women-only groups. But the point of those discussions was to clarify things they wanted to bring back to the couple. That's what I really appreciated about Richard's presentation. Was the most exciting thing about the SMS is that they're sharing it with their partners, because that brings back into the co-parenting, and the co-parenting platform is the one from which the fathers is going to be most successful as a dad. So I think that we did answer the question of, yes, you can have positive outcomes for fathers in father-only interventions, but they do not endure at the level that they do when you work with a couple.
Thanks, Dr. Pruitt. Richard, we have a question here that you already also answered, but I thought was an important one regarding if you can clarify the starting point of enrolling SMS initiative.
The enrollment happens online, so there's a website. And so at the moment, the Australian government has funded SMS for Dads to be national. So we are now promoting the program across rural and remote areas of Australia, because even in those areas, of course, you can still receive texts. So you enroll by going to the SMS for Dads website. The questions are brief about when your baby's due, your age, and your phone number, and the K6, that distress scale we ask people, and whether you're Indigenous and so on. But apart from that, the questions are simple. You answer those, and then the messages begin. And you can opt out anytime by texting back stop, and then we take you out of the program. So it's not a commitment where you get a lot of pressure to stay in. I think that answers it. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Also, I have now, and please keep asking questions. The panelists will be with us during the entire webinar, so we'll be glad to answer. If they don't have the time to answer and we end the webinar before, we are recording this session and we'll forward the questions to the panelists later on. Douglas, one interesting question that came up here was on how are fathers, as you mentioned, the work in Bolivia, for example, how are fathers for children in rural, underserved communities involved in this? What is their experiences in their child care roles? If you could answer that, please. Douglas, ¿estás con nosotros? Creo que tu micrófono está...
Sí, Luciano, lo que pasa tenía problemas con el sonido por el internet ahora que está malo. ¿Me puedes repetir, por favor? Disculpa.
Claro. La pregunta que tenemos es sobre cómo los padres de niños en regiones rurales con pobreza están involucrados en programa P, por ejemplo, en Bolivia. ¿Y cuáles son las experiencias en involucrar los niños en esos programas?
Bueno, comentarte que en el caso de Bolivia hemos trabajado con organizaciones comunitarias rurales que están en estos espacios y con ellos hemos identificado a los papás de estos niños para participar en un proceso del programa P. Hicimos 16 sesiones donde se trabajaba con los papás, con las mamás, por las tardes, una vez que estos papás venían de trabajar de la producción de la tierra, la comunidad, con temas para poder involucrarse en el cuidado, en la crianza, en la tarea doméstica, en el trabajo de diálogo con la pareja. Y en este programa P en Bolivia trabajamos también en grupos separados, solo con papás, y luego también tuvimos sesiones para trabajar con las mamás, porque muchos hombres nos decían que tenían, su esposa no los dejaban incluirse en las tareas de lavar, de cuidar, planchar, porque parte de la tradición de ser papá, en la cultura, los hombres no hacen ese tipo de tareas. Entonces, eran sesiones para poder reflexionar sobre cómo los hombres pueden involucrarse en las tareas de la corresponsabilidad con sus parejas, en la crianza con los niños, en la escuela. Y este programa lo hicimos durante un año y ha sido un proceso muy interesante porque al mismo tiempo nos permitió del programa P crear otras sesiones donde los niños, porque a estas sesiones llegaban los papás y la mamá, llegaban con los niños y con las niñas, y tuvimos que crear un espacio para donde los niños pudiesen jugar, pudiesen compartir entre ellos, pero también hay un momento que los niños y las niñas, sus hijos, querían saber qué estaban haciendo los papás y las mamás en estos talleres de paternidad. Entonces era un espacio interesante para poder pensar en juegos que les permitiera también jugar a los papás con los niños, con las niñas, que les permitiera también tener otro tipo de experiencia. Y otra de las cosas también que nos pasa en América Latina es que se nos ha enseñado que las personas adultas, ya por ser adultas, no podemos jugar en los juegos solo para los niños y para las niñas, y encontramos también esa experiencia que era un espacio muy interesante también, donde los papás y las mamás se divertían jugando, se conectaban con los niños, y las niñas también decían, yo quiero que mi papá se vuelva un loco jugando conmigo, que no siempre me esté regañando o me esté diciendo cosas autoritarias de ser papá. Entonces encontrábamos también estas sesiones para el juego con las niñas y con los niños, otra manera también de que los papás se sentían más conectados, comprometidos con sus hijos y con sus hijas. Y también dentro del área rural también hay otras maneras que se involucran en los espacios comunitarios donde solamente están con los hombres líderes. Entonces los hombres líderes en las comunidades se sintieron muy motivados para poder participar en el proceso y se quedaron durante todas las 16 sesiones, todo lo que duró este programa en Bolivia, y también hicimos una investigación cuantitativa y cualitativa y encontrábamos que durante todo ese periodo los hombres estaban más involucrados en la crianza, en la escuela, pero también habían disminuido el ejercicio de la violencia hacia los niños, hacia las niñas, y por supuesto de la violencia hacia sus parejas. Entonces era una experiencia muy interesante, no solamente el programa P, sino también involucrar a la organización comunitaria indígena que estaba organizando este proceso en el Alto, en Bolivia.
Douglas, thank you so much. I will give 30 seconds to each one of the panelists for the final remarks. So Dr. Pruitt, please. Go ahead, Dr. Pruitt, if you just want to give your final remarks on this panel.
Yes, thank you. Final remarks. The recruitment of men into services is difficult across many cultures. And we have found, as we've worked with indigenous cultures as well as Black and brown cultures in the United States and elsewhere, the thing that works most successfully is a genuine invitation to the man, not passed through the wife or the mother or the partner or the grandmother, but a genuine invitation to him. And that the focus is often most successful when the focus remains on how he can really be effective in raising the child he wants to, focusing on the child outcomes, not what it is that he needs to do differently. I think we have not focused yet on the economics of paternal engagement, but policy leaders need to know that engaging fathers early in the lives of their children saves them more money than they could ever possibly imagine in terms of incarcerations and missed job opportunities and health. And that is something that we as advocates for this experience need to be focusing more on, because the economic assessments have been done. We're just not using them. And finally, one comment, I believe, I can't remember who said it, that the reduction in violence and community violence that we see when fathers are positively engaged with their young children is one of the most effective cultural changes we could ever effect. And I think to many of us, that's the prize, not just interpersonal violence, but violence in the community as a whole. Violence is a solution to frustration. Your children will teach you a great deal about frustration. If you love them, you and the child can get to different kinds of resolutions that do not need to be violent. And I'm a great fan of that path to peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pruitt. Richard, please, for final remarks.
Thank you. Final remark would just be that the public health idea of changing a large part of the population in a small way is as effective as taking just the very needy ones and changing them in a large way. And I think not just SMS, but the idea of nudging fathers in small ways to improve their communication with their partner, looking after themselves and their relationship with their baby. I think that's an effective strategy, as well as those programs that you're describing where fathers are intensively engaged. And I think the other important point is that although we aim to increase his discussions with the mother and respect for the mother and co-parenting, the initial request to the dad is to think about his baby and his relationship with the baby. That's the motivator, rather than, as Kylie put it, telling him he needs to change his behavior. The catch in recruiting fathers, we think, is that the baby is the key. So the baby invites the dad in. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Douglas, 1 minute for final remarks.
Gracias, Miguel. Creo que es fundamental seguir promoviendo las diversas formas de paternidades y cuidados que no están asociados a un tipo de familia, ¿no? Y que a partir de eso es importante poder trabajar con la comunidad y poder promover en agenda pública la importancia del involucramiento de los hombres en los cuidados, conocer las barreras que hay a nivel de la empresa privada y promover los beneficios, pero también creo que es importante que esté conectada con las crianzas positivas, la prevención de la violencia hacia los niños, a las niñas y a las mujeres, y el reconocimiento también de que otros líderes políticos hablen también sobre su forma positiva en el ejercicio de la paternidad y los cuidados como influenciadores hacia otros y hacia otras. Y creo que también es importante poder trabajar un programa de paternidad desde la interculturalidad, ¿no? De poder reconocer todas estas visiones como visiones en los países y en las regiones.
Thank you, Douglas, Richard, Dr. Pruitt. Representing all the 143 participants we have on this webinar, my round of applause to all of you. Great, great session. I was really pleased to moderate this session. But due to constraint of time, I just want to pass on and hand it over to Amanda Germanio, who will be moderating the next part of this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers and panelists here. I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers and presenters for the next section, which will feature short presentations on engaging fathers around the world. And then I'll go ahead and hand over to my colleague Shikufe Zanji to moderate the Q&A session. So I'll go ahead and quickly introduce our first speaker, who is Luciano Ramos from Promundo. He's a senior programs consultant with Promundo. And he has experience in education around gender and sexuality, including the masculinities approach. Luciano has been coordinating projects at Promundo related to these issues since 2018. His advocacy experience includes serving as a counselor for the rights of the child and adolescent in Tucu de Caxias, Rio de Janeiro, and for the National Movement Family and Community Pro-Coexistence of Children and Adolescents. He graduated as a historian and holds a specialization in public policy for children from the Latin American Center at Harvard University. In 2021, Luciano was named a UNESCO Ambassador for Positive Masculinities in the World. Please go ahead.
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches. Es un gusto estar acá con ustedes. Yo voy a hablar un poco sobre la experiencia del programa P, que es el programa de paternidad y cuidado que fue creado por Promundo hace una década. Ese programa piensa e implementa una forma de involucrar a los padres en el cuidado con la niñez en Brasil. Pero como escuchamos Douglas hablando como escuchamos Douglas hablando hace poco, el programa no es solamente de Brasil, pero también un programa que es trabajado en el mundo, sobre todo en la América Latina, en Latinoamérica. Acá, el programa ha sido creado en Brasil, pero ha sido diseminado para los otros países del mundo. Puede pasar, por favor. El programa P es un programa que fue creado con algunas intenciones. A ver, el tema de paternidad es un momento estratégico para cambiar el machismo, para que los hombres se hagan más presentes en la vida de los niños, para que los hombres también piensen en ejercer una paternidad más positiva, una masculinidad positiva. Entonces, a partir de eso, el programa ha trabajado con más de 10.000 hombres en Brasil y otros millares de hombres en el mundo. También, por eso, ha formado los hombres en paternidad y en cuidado. El programa ya ha sido replicado en otros países del mundo también, como he dicho antes. Y el programa fue la base para la creación del programa de paternidad y de prenatal partner del Ministerio de Salud de Brasil. Desde su creación, el programa ha formado profesionales de salud y desarrollo social en Brasil y en otros países. Eso es importante traer acá, porque eso es lo que hace la sustentabilidad del programa. Es necesario pensar que nosotros trabajamos también con los gobiernos, también con las organizaciones sociales y con empresas. Y a partir de eso, capacitamos los profesionales de estos sectores para que puedan seguir haciendo el programa en otros espacios. Así, les gostaria de apresentar os programas como funcionam. Você pode passar, Luísa, por favor. O programa P ha sido durante 10 anos o programa presencial. Ha funcionado como um programa presencial com encontros com homens, haciendo talleres presenciales en las comunidades, en los espacios públicos, en los espacios de salud. Pero la pandemia ha nos invitado a pensar outras formas de hacer el programa de paternidad. La forma que encontramos fuera el programa P Online. El programa P Online es un programa donde usamos WhatsApp para hacer las actividades con los hombres. Desde 2020, el programa P Online ha capacitado más de 1.000 hombres en Brasil. Essa experiência tem sido uma experiência exitosa, porque temos hechos com os governos, também com as organizações sociais. É interessante pensar que, mesmo depois da pandemia, o programa P Online vai seguir, porque é mais uma oportunidade que temos de falar com os homens, é mais uma oportunidade que temos de fazer o programa de paternidade chegar a los homens que necessitam. É importante também pensar que o programa de paternidade online ha sido criado em um formato que logra falar com os homens mesmo com pouca internet, porque isso na realidade, por exemplo, em las comunidades mais pobres do Brasil e do mundo. Então, podemos passar, por favor. Agora, nós vamos falar um pouco sobre as etapas do programa. O programa se divide em 5 etapas: evaluação, participação, involucramento de los hombres, sensibilização, e há pouco ponemos mais uma etapa no programa, que é a etapa de escuta. Isso porque, e agora quero falar um pouco sobre ele, que é porque estamos trabalhando com homens, padres de comunidades tradicionais de Brasil, comunidade indígena, por exemplo. Então, o que estamos fazendo é considerar, é valorizar, é valorar os saberes que a comunidade que estamos trabalhando tem tradicionalmente. Então, escuchamos de la comunidade o que é a paternidade para essa comunidade, como os homens desta comunidade exercem sua paternidade, como hablan para os outros homens sobre paternidade. Então, escuchamos tudo isso, pensamos tudo isso e vemos todo o ciclo de programa, considerando o que estão trazendo em el início, en el processo de escuta. Então, passamos à próxima fase do programa, que é a sensibilização. A ideia da sensibilização é o diálogo que hacemos com os gestores públicos sobre os benefícios do programa, sobre os benefícios da paternidade participativa, a paternidade cuidadosa, a paternidade ativa, no processo de desenvolvimento de niños. Então, temos aí uma participação mais efetiva do governo e de los gestores públicos. O passo posterior que hacemos é capacitar os equipos de direção técnica e equipos de atenção direta das famílias para que possam compreender a importância de incluir a los hombres no desenvolvimento de los niños pequeños. Muitas vezes, os profissionais que estão em los equipos de direção técnica e também de la atenção direta não compreendem muito bem a importância de valorizar os homens no processo de desenvolvimento de niños. Pensam muitas vezes que os homens que estão ali não vão ajudar no processo, não vão participar do processo, pero o que hacemos en la capacitación es la posibilidad de que los profesionales comprendan la necesidad de incluir los hombres en el proceso de educación de los niños, en el proceso de cambiar el modelo de masculinidad machista en un modelo de masculinidad positiva y participativa. ¿Sí? Entonces, el paso siguiente, hacemos la participación. La participación es un proceso donde llamamos, hacemos talleres con los hombres para que puedan participar, entendiendo que hay etapas distintas, como las etapas de desarrollo del niño, la división de tareas de cuidado y protección, división de tareas del hogar, la salud de los hombres, la importancia de cuidar de sus emociones, también la importancia de educar niños sin violencia. Sí, por favor. Y entonces vamos a tener la evaluación. En la evaluación aplicamos cuestionarios evaluativos para percibir los cambios iniciales que implementan los padres en sus formas de ejercer la paternidad. Hay un punto que no ha pasado acá, pero es la involucración, que aquí está el engajamiento de los hombres, que es cuando nosotros hacemos campaña con la comunidad y con los hombres sobre la importancia de la paternidad en el cuidado. Y entonces yo gustaría de cerrar mi participación con el próximo, por favor, que son relatos de los padres sobre el programa de paternidad y cuidado. Muchos hombres hablan sobre los cambios que empezaron después de participar de los grupos de paternidad y de cuidado. Un hombre dice, fue la primera vez que jugué con mi hija. Siempre pensé que era demasiado grosero para jugar con una niña, pero el grupo me animó y sentí que podía. El padre 2 dice, nunca le había contado un cuento a mi hijo. No sé leer. Inventé una historia en mi cabeza y se la conté a mi hijo, a él le gustó. Nunca me había detenido a pensar que era muy importante compartir esas actividades del hogar. Pensé que hacer ejercicio era más esgotador. Cuando hice una lista con mi esposa de lo que ella hace todos los días, vi que estaba siendo injusto. Mi deber ahora es empezar a cambiar eso. El último, estaba desempleado cuando nació mi hija. Este peluche que le regalé fue con un trabajo que hice unos días antes que naciera. Tiene mucho valor para mí. Cuando pienso en ello, me dan ganas de llorar. Una cosa muy importante que acá deseo hablar es lo siguiente. El programa que hacemos es un programa de entre 6 y 8 semanas. En este proceso, los hombres empiezan a cambiar, pero es el inicio del proceso. Hay que tener una comunidad, hay que tener una sociedad que contribua para que el proceso de cambio que los hombres están empezando siga en la sociedad. Entonces, por eso también hacemos un trabajo muy fuerte de advocacy en Brasil, para que la sociedad, la comunidad esté segura, esté lista para seguir apoyando para que los hombres hagan el proceso de cambio del machismo para una masculinidad positiva y que la comunidad también esté lista para apoyar una paternidad más cuidadosa y más afectiva. Es eso. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We'll go on now to our next presenter, who is Dr. Vivian Ngueni, a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Human Development at Aga Khan University. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology from Moy University, a master's in public health degree from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and her joint doctorate degree in global health under the Erasmus Mundus Program Scholarship was pursued at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Barcelona Institute for Global Health in Spain, and the Institute for Tropical Medicine at Antwerp, Belgium. Dr. Nguyen's research interests and expertise are in early childhood development, mixed methods research, health systems, and implementation science. So I will go ahead and turn over to her. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. And it's such a pleasure to be part of this webinar. And thank you for the warm introductions. My presentation will highlight the research you're currently doing on the engaging fathers through the SMS for Baba program in the urban informal settlements of Nairobi. And this is work in collaboration with Dr. Fletcher, who previously gave an overview of the SMS for Baba program, as well as our University of Toronto colleagues. So as a way of introduction, we know that engaging fathers in maternal and child health is of critical importance, and it's widely recognized. However, there are very many programs that focus on women, especially during their perinatal and postnatal period, but there is very limited or little that's existing for fathers. And we know that the existing intervention, especially in the high income settings, that using through brief educative short text messages that have been found acceptable as information channels for fathers. However, at the same time, we have very limited of that research within the low and middle income country settings. Given the high coverage of mobile phone coverage, as well as access in the African context, it presents an opportunity to explore this platform to engage fathers. So just to talk about how we adapted the program SMS for Dads Australia to SMS for Baba Kenya. As Dr. Fletcher mentioned, that the SMS for Dads Australia program is a brief text messages that are sent to expectant partners within the 20th week of gestation and 48 weeks post-birth. The topics basically focus on child-father bond, self-care, or rather father's well-being, mother support, and couple relationship. So with those themes, we also carried them over to our SMS for Baba program. And here in Kenya, in the urban informal settlements of Dagoretti, we set up a study to pre-test and adapt the SMS for Baba intervention. And this was part of an integrated early child development and parenting intervention that is ongoing. Just to spend a few minutes on how we adapted this program. So in the first instance, we did some translation of the original messages from the SMS for Dad Australia program. And this was done by the researchers using both the forward and backward translation techniques to translate the messages into Swahili. And then once this were done, we were able to conduct 3 focus group discussions with 19 fathers, both old and young, who either had an expectant partner or had a child under 6 months. And basically the essence of this FGDs were to pretest the messages, but also to understand from the fathers what are some of the interesting things that they would like to learn as health topics and how to be able to implement this intervention within this context. After this, we conducted a pilot where we enrolled 20 expectant, 20 Kenyan fathers who had expectant partners, and received messages which are transmitted from the University of Newcastle for a period of 6 weeks, and they were receiving this 3 times weekly. At the end, they were invited to participate in focus group discussions to share their program experiences. Once we concluded the pilot, and as I mentioned, this was part of an integrated ECD intervention, we were able to enroll 76 fathers who had their partners enrolled in the integrated ECD intervention. The fathers who enrolled in our study were mainly engaged in a telephonic way, where throughout they received the messages from the 4th trimester till 6 months post-birth. And as part of our research activities, we were able to collect baseline and endline, participate in a baseline and endline survey. And we also invited them, some of the consenting fathers, to participate in endline FGDs, which we conducted recently. In terms of characteristics of our participants, the majority of the fathers were in their 30s, had attained a secondary school education, had basic education at least secondary level, and their occupation, or they were mainly doing casual work during the day, or either as in doing night jobs as security guards. We also noticed that our participants across the different pilot and in the intervention, they had good access to internet, and at least 1/3 of them, or at least a quarter, were first-time fathers. We also had some representation of non-Kenyans, given that the setting we are working with has embedded refugees. As part of the messages that were also disseminated from in the postnatal component on smoking and alcohol. So for those who said they were taking alcohol or smoking, they received these particular messages. Moving over to our findings, and I will focus more on the qualitative work. During the pilot phase and in the discussions we had with fathers in the focus group discussions, the majority had messages that had focused on the father and the experiences that they were going through. And particularly they needed at the end guidance or what they were expected to do as a father. And I shared 2 quotes pulled up from the messages sample. For example, this one says, "For dad, having a baby will change your life. Try and think of all the good things that you expect will happen when the baby is born and joins the father. If you're struggling with change, then your partner is probably feeling the same. Talking to each other about your hopes, dreams, and fears can really help." Fathers expressed an interest to receive messages that talked about their mental health and general well-being, about their child-father relationship, facts about pregnancy and knowledge around that, as well as how to prepare to receive the baby. During the pilot discussions, some of the potential barriers that were identified were if there was any foreseen cost in terms of calling back or texting back, as well as if the messages were foreseen to be many. I'll share some findings based on the program experiences, and I will focus on the messages that were targeting the baby or from the baby. The fathers expressed that these messages, they were very helpful in strengthening the bond with their unborn babies. And additionally, they felt that these messages helped them look forward to having their babies, and thereby prompting them to create time and bond with their baby. Like this quote suggests, from a father in the intervention endline, this recent focus group discussions we had, messages were effective since I could focus on work and still get the messages. The information brought me closer to my child. On the messages about self-care and the father's well-being, the majority of the fathers felt.
Would just ask you to quickly wrap up if possible, says we're running short on time, and to make sure we can get through all of the presenters. Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of the messages that were targeting the father, they felt encouraged, and especially at a time where they were having challenges during the COVID period, where they had the economic impact of COVID on their jobs and livelihoods, they felt hopeful receiving these messages. They appreciated messages on alcohol, and the ones that talked about exercising, they were able to practice them together with their partner. But more importantly, they were able to learn practical tips on how to control their anger and manage their anger. In terms of messages that were supporting their wives or their family relations, they were able to learn to be more patient and understanding of the situation at the moment and offer support. And particularly engaging in household chores, for example, feeding the baby or supporting with the baby, which were things that were not part of the norm and traditions in this, where they were coming from. They also learned that whatever is done to the mother indirectly reaches to the unborn baby, as illustrated in the quote. So what are the general impressions of this program? Overall, fathers found this very positively and acceptable for fathers in this informal settlement. They learned more about child development as well as how to handle young babies, and they're able to share with their spouses, workmates, and fathers to be, with the majority saying they will highly recommend this program to others, as illustrated in that quote. But in terms of feedback, especially how to improve this program, there are several issues that came up. For example, They would have loved to, beyond the SMSs, an opportunity to engage with meetups with other fathers to learn more. And given there was quite good coverage of internet access and other platforms, they recommended that those could be explored, especially in disseminating information about child development. They wished to have the program extend for more than a year, cover and target more men who are even beyond the study site, first-time fathers and young fathers. But also in terms of targeted engagement, they encourage the use of reaching out to their spouses, community health volunteers, but also recommended that they who are program beneficiaries can be used as peer recruiters or mobilizers to other fathers. I wish to thank the study participants, the co-investigators, collaborators, and funders for support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. Since we're running short on time and we want to make sure that all of our presenters have enough time, we'll go ahead and jump right into our next presenter, who is Professor Hisina Ibrahim, a research professor in the Department of Early Childhood Education at the University of South Africa, UNISA. She also holds the UNESCO Co-Chair in Early Education, Care and Development. She is a rated researcher with the National Research Foundation. Her research coheres around early childhood at the margins with special reference to policy, practice, and workforce development. Professor Ibrahim won the 2017 and 2020 UNISA Women in Research Leadership Awards. Professor Ibrahim is the convener of the Knowledge Generation Working Group in the Early Childhood Cluster in the African Union. She is also part of the Working Group on ECD Educator Workforce Development in the South Africa Department of Higher Education. She is currently leading projects on ECD workforce sustainability, child rights, rights-based child participation, and process quality. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me on this platform. I seem to be having a problem with sharing my presentation. Can I please ask you to share it from your side? Once that's in progress, the presentation I'm about to make has been funded by the African Early Childhood Network, and basically it consisted of having a desktop review of the barriers, the achievements, and the kind of interventions that were in the region of Africa. And that was then used to develop terms of reference, a call for action, and a regional roadmap for early childhood in terms of male engagement in childcare. So basically, the presentation today is going to be on the systems, the policies, the laws, and specifically in the case of men in childcare in Africa. Next slide, please. And what I wanted to do here was to just demystify what happens when you take male engagement and you place it within a systems thinking. So there's two angles to it, the systems thinking and the systems approach. With the approach, we'd have to look at the processes, the methods, the practices that are used to effect systems change. And if you had to answer that from a fatherhood perspective or from a male engagement perspective, what would be the kinds of things that would come through? So that was of interest for this angle of the study. The next important thing to understand is that when you are doing systems thinking, you're concerned with the narrowness and the staticness of what is presented as the worldview on fatherhood and male engagement. And that replacement then requires some really robust dynamic thinking that gives you a different perspective on the world from the vantage point of multiple voices enabled through stakeholder participation. And once that is in place, then you have this kind of leverage to reinvent and reimagine the policies through the champions and the advocates that are around a participatory policy development process. Next slide, please. And so the next thing that I wanted to share with you is that what happens when policies and laws take a static view of men in childcare in Africa, given this is a regional perspective. And we had quite a bit around how when you deal with this particular body of knowledge, you're dealing with a lot of contextual and cultural practices. So the one thing that you would have to look at is when you're looking at moving towards robust policies and laws for men in childcare, you would have to look at what is the dominant view and how does it pan out? How is it performed? And the dominant view, of course, is the women's work and the naturalization of nurturance as care work for women. And so in the African part of it and other parts of the world as well, the practices of patriarchy are not to be discounted. You find that the gendered rigid role and the gender socialization according to this creates the division between men and women. So the male protector, disciplinarian, and breadwinner role is entrenched. It is naturalized. So any efforts to break that has to work with the denaturalization, the mindsets and the complexities around that in terms of the practices. And then, of course, the caregivers being the female and the domestic child, especially in early childhood, the formative years. So what we're dealing with is, and most of you have like brought this to the fore, is the issue of the gender injustice, where the burden of care falls on women and their contribution to the labor force is restricted or expanded depending on how the issues of the caregiving are approached and what opportunities arise there. So basically what we are concerned with, and that, you know, speakers have like focus on this, the roles and responsibilities of fathers in the different stages of the child development process, beginning from the pregnancy and the early socialization that happens to boys and girls. Another thing that we have to take into account is to look at institutional access, all right, and children in early childhood centers and the role models that they are exposed to. And in Africa, we have a lot of the distant father syndrome because of our migrant labor policies. But distance does not mean that they are disengaged. They do engage, and there is an economic contribution that they make. Next slide, please. So if we look at what happens when you take a static view and the issues to be concerned with, well, what happens when a dynamic view is promoted within the policy and the law arena? So you look at the recognition of women as well as men and fathers as profitable for what children's outcomes could be like. Why? Because this grouping here has a particular role to play in the bonding, the security, the identity building, and the early learning outcomes. And valuing the contribution of the fathers and the men in early childhood, there are great contributions towards the well-being and the possibilities of what women can do with their time and with their involvement in children's lives. And the co-parenting becomes a reality. Remember that this is very difficult in a patriarchal society where there is that work has to be done of denaturalization, and some interventions have been able to crack the code. But have we cracked the code long enough for over a period of, are there longitudinal studies that show that they have cracked the code to such an extent that this has, shifted from heavy patriarchy to more inviting roles that men play? So in the policies and the laws that we are promoting, we should scan them and ask what views are presented of the caregivers. And in this case here, the male and the male engagement and the fathers. So if you look at the contextual realities, then you would look at, well, what is the dominant kind of message going on and what is on the margins? And how do we introduce transformative elements so that we have a more expanded and more enabling environment for male participation? Next slide, please. And so I thought the next bit that I would look at is the ecological model. So this promotes a dynamic view of the policies and the laws. And so what is it? What is our aspirational goal? What is the minimum that we'd like to see? What is the ideal? We'd like to see societies that are non-violent, that are gender transformative, and that have a generationally sensitive approach. So the interventions that are being described and that are coming on need to assess the extent to which they are generationally applicable for the context in which they work. And so if we look at the levels in the ecological model, from the micro level, we are looking at the interactions and the relationships that happen with the major kinds of stakeholders in the near environment. At the meso level, we look at the connectedness of males and fathers with the institutions of experience. And in the macro level, this is where the policies and the laws fit in. And so the ecological model gives you a holistic response of what you are doing at multiple levels and how you are influencing at different levels. Next slide, please. And I thought what would be nice is to show in a regional context like Africa, what has been the snapshot with regard to parental support for positive parenting. And this is, there's research to suggest that when you look at positive parenting and you look at some of the indicators, in this case, 9 were created, some were related directly to positive relating, others to violence, others relational. But just looking at one, which is number 4, where men are taking responsibility for their children, irrespective of relationship status. This is important, right? In the relational domain. So men care for children.
Sorry to jump in. Could I ask you to wrap up if possible, since we still have our last presenter? Thanks. Just a quick wrap up.
Thanks. So you can see there that the colors give you a different view of the scenario of where male engagement and fatherhood in terms of positive parenting and the policy environment is. So it goes from green right up to the red areas and in between. Next slide, please. And so the following is around paternity leave. So we're doing in the African continent, we're doing well in the maternal leave, and there's a presence of paternal leave. But the paternal leave still needs a lot of work to be done. So it ranges from 1 to 3 days, all right? And there's an exception of Madagascar. And so why? If you have to look at this, it's possible that the policy idea of fathers having leave to bond with the children is new. And the father's knowledge of leave provision could also be another one. And so a study in Kenya showed that even though fathers knew about the leave, the uptake was low, and fathers preferred to take other types of leave. The next slide, please. And so the concluding remarks around this is that if we require genuine transformation for the engagement of males and fatherhood and this whole arena that we're dealing with for transformation, it requires more than money. So if we delve into the economics of fatherhood and male engagement, we get a better sense of what I'm talking about here. But we should be looking for ways to innovate, integrate, and generate systemic change, of which the interventions that we analyzed, about 46 of them, were showing threads to move in that direction. And when we're bringing systems change, you cannot stop one thing and then start the next. You work as a parallel process to invite integration. So we're dealing with comprehensive early childhood programming. So for each of the sectors, we should be asking what is being done for male engagement and fatherhood in early childhood. And this should be throughout all of the sectors and should be the engagements within the stakeholder forums, like intersectoral stakeholder forums where civil society is involved. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and jump into our last presenter. We're running low on time, so I'll just go ahead and very quickly introduce Dr. Mihaela Ionescu, the Program Director for the International Step-by-Step Association, ISA, which is a membership association that connects close to 100 member organizations from 43 countries in Europe and Central Asia. Please go ahead, Mihaela. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. Well, it's been quite a marathon, and I hope people are still with us and can focus their attention. I will try to be, I will try to ensure a kind of an organic continuation of the discussion, and hopefully this will happen in the next 10 minutes. We were talking about new perspectives on fatherhood, and what I'm going to share, as you mentioned, we are a network, an early childhood network with a lot of organizations stretching from Europe to Central Asia. I'm going to share about the work we are doing and contributing actually to the topic that is a complex one of fatherhood and man engagement. We do advocate for competent systems, and I'm glad that it has been tackled on this issue because it's embedded in systems. So it does matter to work with fathers, with mothers, with families, but we have to work at the system level equally as we strive to show that it's so important, the father's presence in the early years. And if there are quality and inclusive and equitable services provided to children, then fathers should be definitely involved. We heard today that there are a lot of grounding rationales for action. And I'm talking now on behalf of my region, Europe and Central Asia, and we do acknowledge that there are still persisting gender-related prejudices and stereotypes, unfortunately violence against women and children, and a gender gap in informal care work across Europe, as well as engaging men in formal care. And it has been tackled how we attract more men in the care professions. But equally, and Hasina just pointed to that, there is either a lack or insufficient legal provision for paternal leave. And the COVID pandemic has showed a great impact on family life. All of this has been mentioned previously. Also that there is a growing evidence, and here I put just a few of the evidence that already exists. And we mentioned that if we want to decrease the violence in society, we know that by early witnessing and experiencing the violence as a child increases the likelihood of violence against children and women later in men's lives. But also that boys who experience a positive caregiving influence from men in the household are more likely to have gender equitable attitudes, and they are more likely to participate in care work and less likely to use violence against females. Gender equality and equitable caregiving is having a clear positive effect, not only of fathers, but both mothers and fathers. But more importantly, as we are the ones that are supporting system in becoming more father-friendly, professionals may serve as gatekeepers to men's participation in caregiving. So that they play an important role in the way that the systems are functioning. Because they are reinforcing the mother's traditional roles. And when I'm saying professionals, I'm referring to all those that are working in the early childhood services. So they see the mothers as primary child caring actor, and they enable that through their institutional practices. Well, as I mentioned, it's a complex, and we all of us have said that, it's a complex and multifaceted societal issue. But I mean, all of them, gender equality, fatherhood, and man engagement in care. What we are doing in our network, and by being a network, I think we are in a very fortunate place in the architecture of all the actors that are converging towards a change, a systemic change, as we are the ones that are kind of a knowledge broker, we are a connector between policy, research, and practice, and we are able to transfer or to amplify those programs or those policies that have been successful, as we learn a lot from one country to another among the countries, what changes have been successful or are enabling the change. And we focus on two elements when we talk about fathers. They are both important, involving them in the children's development and care, but also involving them in care professions. When we are talking about, as Hasina was mentioning, about systemic change and system thinking and system changing, we are talking about multiple audience. So the issue cannot be tackled only by addressing fathers or by addressing mothers. Obviously, we need to address a lot of actors, early childhood practitioners from different sectors, training providers, policymakers, program developers. So it's a very vast, let's say, group of audience that we have to tackle. That means that we need to use different types of actions, evidence building, and it was mentioned at the very beginning about research. I think that there is still a long way in that direction to build more evidence that can strengthen our advocacy work, but also our informal programming. Advocacy is also, a lot has been done lately because of already creating some evidence, but there's still a lot to be done at different levels, like local, country level, and regional level, and global level. And this initiative is very welcome. Training and support, capacity building for the early childhood workforce. I think, as I said, they are gatekeepers. So I think enabling such kind of practices to become part of the normal, of the routine way of looking at fathers, mothers, families, and children, it's something essential for the systems thinking and the change of the system, as well as training and support directly for parents. We talked a lot about how we can do that in a patriarchal society. I think it's about how we prepare the change, how ready we are to create that change ourselves, and then how this can be happening in practice. Examples from today have been very useful, and I'm going to share a few of them, just a few of the things that we are doing in our network with our partners. We said that
sorry to interrupt, but just asking if you could kind of go through them quickly so that we can wrap up as close to on time.
I hope I will be able to do that, Amanda.
Thank you.
The strategic approach we are having, it's a top-down and bottom-up. So creating an enabling policy environment, I said, it's essential. But as well, it is to have competent people that understand the whole concept of positive masculinity, of fatherhood, of why men should be involved, and what's that advantage, especially for the children's development. And there are different entry points for that. I'm going to give, for example, of what we have done through the work that we've been in our region. We developed together with our colleagues from the UNICEF office at the regional office in Europe and Central Asia, 22 resource modules for home visitors. They are an excellent entry point for influencing practices in general, fatherhood, motherhood, and child rearing. And those modules, while they are focusing on different topics, they do have this kind of cross-cutting topic of gender transformative dimension, challenging the gender inequalities, promoting non-judgmental approach, modeling bias-free and strength-based approaches, and the issue of gender is present in all of them. But more than that, we have had 2 modules that were primarily tackling on this. They are available and they can be used in adapted in context, although they have been already used in many countries and they didn't need a lot of adaptation, but they have been used for health workers, those that are visiting families, and they have a close and direct contact with parents and mothers and fathers. The one on the fathers, as you can see, that have been referenced today, they talk about the co-parenting and the parenting team. They talk about the impact of fatherhood on men and fathers' impact on new mothers. They showcase the impact of fathers and their engagement on the long-term well-being of children, because it's very important that they understand why this is important. They are not always well-informed about the impact that they have on the child development. And after offering also new models for engaging fathers, there's a lot of inspiration in this model for the practitioners that are stepping into the family's home. The second one is about the gender dynamics in families. And we know that there are many topics that are very taboo topics, let's say, and starting tackling on those, it's not easy, and it can be done by a trustful professional, such as home visitors, but they are not the only ones, professionals that are having this kind of direct entrance, let's say, into the narrative of a family. And these are some of the topics that have been addressed in the module on gender dynamics, as you can see. The other thing that we are doing on the level, let's say, that is more about capacity building of home visitors. The work that we are doing with the UNICEF office in New York is about learning what gender responsive parenting programs are out there and develop a training module for the program developers so that we have more programs that are actually addressing the issue, and they are spread in more countries. So that's on another level that we are working. The third example is about a parent European manual that has been developed based on a pilot project that was implemented in 4 countries. And this one is tackling primarily the health workers, but it's not only destined for health workers. It's very important that it can be used, it can be adapted, of course, but it has been informed by different country contexts. It informs a program that can help professionals working in different types of services that meet parents and have direct contact with the parents and especially with fathers. on how they can use, especially the part of the postnatal period, so that they get more engaged into the caring responsibilities. It can be used not only for capacity building programs, it can be used also for advocacy purposes, because as you can see, you can see in the content of the manual itself, it has also a chapter that focuses on early childhood development, so that is more clear why this is important, how it can be used, how fathers can be involved, what are the barriers for their involvement, what are the benefits for their involvement, how this has been, the COVID pandemic has impacted the father's engagement, and how we can facilitate the father involvement through more inclusive practices. The fourth example, and with this I'm going to close, it's a multi-year initiative that we are, a multi-year and multi-country initiative that we are developing with the Center for Social Studies in Portugal. And here we are tackling, as I said, there are multiple entry points and multiple actors that need to be targeted. One is, this one has the two major components in a top-down and bottom-up approach, focusing on advocacy and policy influencing, and the one on the capacity building and program practice. Everything that has been said today and all the programs that have been developed, including the program PE, but also the parent that has been developed in Europe, all of these are extremely useful resources for continuing building the narrative, also on the European level, about how important are fathers, the importance of fatherhood and gender equity for child's development, but also to influence the policies that are enabling at the European and at the country level. In the selected countries we will work, those kind of policies that are encouraging the participation of fathers, either be that parental leave, but also in the way that the training of the professionals includes such kind of topics, and they shift the understanding of the father's role and father's involvement, but also the man being included in the workforce. However, even if there is a policy environment in place, if we don't have the right people with the right understanding that agree and are ambassadors of such kind of views, it will be useless. Therefore, having programs ready to be implemented that have been tested and have been successfully implemented in other places are the ones that are going to make things happen in practice, which is the thing that we are mostly interested to see. We have considered different types of professionals, because working multi-sectorally is essential if we want to have a system change. And at different levels in the system, as we said, competence system, practitioners, those that are developing the curriculum for pre-service, for in-service training, those that are doing supervision and monitoring, all of them are equally important in enabling such kind of practices to become a real an everyday looking at fathers and having them involved in children's lives and in decisions around children's development. I'm going to start here, Amanda, and I'm obviously inviting all our participants to follow all our work on our website and by signing up to our newsletter to learn more about the initiatives we are having in our region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our presenters. In addition to the recording of the webinar, we'll also be circulating the links from the presenters today. Unfortunately, we're over time, so I'll go ahead and turn over to Elizabeth Boulay from ECDAN to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. What an amazing, inspiring webinar we've had today, and all the sharing that took place. I had inspiring, captivating, moving, fathers speaking as fathers. It was truly touching. And I'd like to thank our presenters, our keynote speaker, the panelists, the moderators, and obviously there is so much to say, we ran out of time, and apologies for that. But what I heard was we need to do more advocacy. We need to innovate. We need to build evidence. We need to integrate. And it's about systems change. And it's engaging the workforce to help fathers be fathers. That was what I could summarize, because it was such a rich discussion. But I would like to invite you to join our call to action, which I think I hope somebody put in the chat, but let me find it where it is. And the collective action goes, it's protection to children and support families to cope with the stresses, especially with all these overlapping crises that the world is facing, enable parents to nurture children's development across the life course, and build the foundation for uptake and innovation of evidence-based parent support. Please join us to build a global movement to support parents. Please join us to support fathers and build this community of practice that will enable us to continue the conversation, learn together, share resources, and promote peer learning between all of the partners. And finally, I'd like to thank our partners that have joined us in establishing this working group. I'd like to thank the ECDAN and Promundo teams that have worked behind the scenes, Jackie, Nina, Louisa, Amanda, Shekufe, everybody. And of course, to thank Miguel Fernandes, who has agreed to chair the working group. On May the 25th, we will have another formal launch of this working group, and there will be a technical chat. So please join us on May the 25th. We will be sending out materials. And then finally, join the Global Initiative to Support Parents as well, and share more broadly all the materials and all the evidence that you're generating. And hopefully we'll all meet somewhere, maybe in person, maybe virtually, for the Global Summit at the end of this year. So thanks everybody, and I wish you a nice evening or a nice afternoon, wherever you are. To be continued. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye, thank you, Miguel. Always a pleasure to work together. Thank you, Moses.
It was wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. It has been a wonderful
Thanks,
moment.
everyone.
Thank
See you
you.
on the 25th. Great.
Bye-bye.